Panel members introduce themselves. I'm Dennis Tallman, usually I sit over there in the class. The rest of you guys, but I play on the men's water polo team here, men's water polo club. We compete in the Big Ten, sort of give you an idea for the landscape. Water polo is one of those sports that a lot of schools, especially on the men's side, don't necessarily have a varsity program. I was able to serve as one of the captains this season, and I'll be happy to answer whatever questions you have about club sports life.
Hi, my name is Lexi Sheppy. I'm the Assistant Director for Club Sports. This is my 4th year at the University of Michigan. A little bit of background, I did my undergrad at the University of Texas. I have a sport management degree from there. I have a master's in sport administration from Ball State University, and have spent all of my professional years working for recreational sports departments in various capacities. So club sports, I'm happy to provide some perspectives from other places I've been, just some information I have about other universities and how things are done at those places. And yeah, so any of those type of questions are definitely things I'm happy to answer as well.
Hello everyone, I'm Steve Bodai. I am the assistant coach for the men's club soccer team that will actually be traveling to nationals this week to go and play for a title, hopefully, so we're really excited about that. I've been coaching with the team for about 6 years now. Before that, I coached at a small private liberal arts school, we've done soccer, so kind of have that background as well.
Hello everyone, my name is Marcus Jackson. I'm an Associate Director for Programs here at the University of Michigan in Recreational Sports. I am in my 10th year at the university. Most of those were in our housing department, also here on campus. Undergrad at California, Berkeley, where I also worked in their sports and recreation department, and then did my master's at Eastern down the street. Hoping to just add to what the other panelists here can speak to today, and hopefully provide some insights to you all on club sports.
So to kind of start things off on a bigger picture, we're going to look at, can you describe the role of club sports, both here at Michigan, and then also for those of you that have experience at other universities, what the role was at those universities as well?
Where to begin? Let's see. So I'll start with similarities, things you see across the country. Club sports are obviously an opportunity for people to participate in a sport. And that's kind of where that participation similarity ends in a lot of situations. So here at the university, we're a competitive sports model. Our teams are expected to affiliate with a national governing body, participate on a regional and hopefully national level. And we do have some standards that they have to meet about how many competitions they participate in a year, how many competitive athletes they have on their team. And so that's something that I would say we are on kind of one extreme in that sense when you look across the country. So at other locations, club sports is an opportunity where everyone is able to participate. So there are certain schools that don't allow their clubs to cut people. Here in our makeup, that would be a really tough thing to do because you have a soccer team of 25 or a water polo team of 30-ish. And if you have 100 people coming to try out, you can't keep all of them. There's not the facility space, there's not the resources. But at some universities, it is a participatory model where they are required to keep those people and allow them to participate in some capacity with the team. Let's see, around the country, I would say consistently, this is a leadership opportunity for students, and that's really something that is a strong value of ours in recreational sports as a field. These are student-led, student-run organizations. The students are really doing the work, and I like to compare, we have 31 teams, athletics has 31 teams. We have 3 full-time staff, they have 300 full-time staff. So a lot of that work has to be done by the students if they want to be successful. And we have great students who do that. But that's kind of across the country. These are student-led and run organizations. And it's really in their hands how competitive they are, how much money they raise, what kind of uniforms they wear. So it varies a lot from school to school. And I think that's one of the things that doesn't get recognized enough on this campus. yes, we provide opportunities for competition. Yes, we have national champions on an annual basis. But first and foremost, we're creating leadership opportunities, and we're creating great leaders out of this program. They're managing budgets of somewhere between $40,000 and $100,000 a year in a lot of situations. They're managing their peers and making sure that they're doing what needs to be done so their peers can go compete and travel and be successful. So I think that a lot of the work that's being done on that student leader level is something that we could do a better job of helping them to portray on a resume or in an interview. I'm going to pass it off because I'm sure there's other things that should be talked about.
I actually think Lexi covered a lot of it. The only other thing that I would add is there are some schools where club sports really can sort of be structured to almost be a feeder sort of program for the intercollegiate athletics program, depending on the institution. But still, the leadership structure is typically consistent even at those schools. It just depends on where the actual department gets their funding from, that kind of thing, where they might be sponsored by the athletic department, which actually our club sport program was up till
2009.
2009. So we reported to athletics up till 2009, and then are now under the Department of Student Life, or under the Division of Student Life. So that's probably the only other thing.
That just gave me a reminder. There are universities that are using their club sports programs as recruiting tools to get students to come to their school. So Dennis and I were just talking about this a minute ago. There are schools that are able to offer preferential admissions, who are able to go out and recruit. They may not be necessarily providing academic scholarships or athletic scholarships, but they're able to go out and recruit students to come to their university to play a sport, not on an NCAA level, which is in a lot of ways a great benefit. But you see that more at the smaller universities. So the operating budgets of those programs are much higher than ours. Ferris State is a good example. I have a colleague who I worked with there, and I was just so excited for him, but also a little bit sad. He was like, I have all this money and I don't know what to do with it. I'm like, man, that'd be a great problem to have, right? So a lot of universities are using the resources and putting it into these type of programs to try and draw students in to apply and to attend their university. So not the case here. It's not something that we have the ability to do. But at a lot of smaller universities, schools that have typically been commuter schools will use club sports and recreational sports in general as a way to try and recruit new students to come and be a part of their university.
Dennis, Lexi mentioned the student-led nature of club sports. Can you describe a little bit what it's like to lead a club sports program?
Absolutely. So I've served on our board in a number of capacities, as well as a captain on sort of the team operations side, and it's essentially running a small business. We have to underwrite, we have to do budgets, we have to go through getting licensing for our apparel. We have to make sure our guys are showing up. We have to fire coaches, write contracts. These are all things that we're sort of asked to do, and it's very difficult in nature because, as you know, as students, there's a lot of other things that could be done with your time. On a Thursday night, not necessarily everyone wants to go to do this fundraising event when they could be going to Scorekeeper's Bar and Grill or similar institutions. And that's sort of the challenge that we as student leaders have to face. But it's, as Lexi spoke to, it's one that you can utilize on your resume, talk about in interviews. And the bright side, positive side for me is I've been able to combine my athletic experience and professional experience all into one organization, one experience. So that's been, an amazing thing to be a part of here at the university.
So you mentioned some of the challenges you face. Can the rest of you also describe some of the challenges you face day to day in your roles?
Like we've emphasized and talked about a lot, it is student run. So I came from an experience where I was coached at a Division III school, which is NCAA. And the coaches kind of dictate everything. So we planned travel, we planned meals, we planned training sessions. We kind of did all the work that went into the program. When you're dealing with a club sports program, it's very different. It's very student-led. So I think some of the challenges become for coaches, where is that balance in kind of also serving as an advisor to students and kind of helping them understand and learn from their experiences. I think certainly one of the challenges we face as coaches is sometimes failure or not successes in things that aren't necessarily on the playing field. So if we have a student leader that forgets to attend a meeting with club sports or doesn't register to get transportation to a game, that can really impact us on the playing field. So, you know, we maybe end up having guys drive their own cars to a match. So you kind of have some of the fatigue associated with that, or even the risk associated with it. So it's really that difficult balance of kind of talking with your club officers and making sure that the coaches are also in the loop about what's going on outside of training sessions and outside of the field. So those are some of the challenges definitely on the coaching side.
So from an administration side, there's quite a few challenges, I think. Most of them are the types of things that you sort of expect when you're in this field, but I would probably start with just from an affordability standpoint, so thinking about the programs that you have and how accessible they are to different students who want to participate. Even though we're in a competitive model, our goal is still to be accessible to students and to not create barriers that prevent them from being able to participate, whether that's for leisure or because they're on a more competitive side. So I think continuously being on alert for ways that your department creates policies or things that can create that. The other thing is in terms of thinking about safety. So as Lexi had mentioned before, the athletics department, there's about 300 staff, and you actually have staff, a number of them that are dedicated to each sport. So you know that when those teams are away representing the university at distant sites, they actually have someone who can sort of help to make sure that things are being done the way that the institution needs them to be, around safety, around accountability, that kind of thing. In our program, that really falls a lot on that student leadership piece. So there's a lot of trust, I think, that has to go into the communication that we have and the relationship that we have with our student athletes and with our coaches when we send them out, because there's not technically a university full-time employee that's on every trip. If we were to do that, that would require quite a bit from Lexi and our coordinator of club sports. The only other thing that I think falls in line with that is around accountability. So realizing or figuring out where the where the line is between advising and really sort of leading ourselves. We want our clubs to kind of control their own destiny and to be able to speak to that experience the way that they would get the most out of it. And you can't really do that and call yourself a club sport if everything is sort of driven from the top. So I think constantly trying to balance that, as well as thinking about all of the things, concussion safety, the different protocols that you have to have in place to make sure that the activities are happening in the best environments that will help to lend something to the student experience.
I'm going to expand a little bit on what Marcus just started to talk about. So on our campus, there are two types of organizations. There are voluntary student organizations, and there are sponsored student organizations. So on campus, the total number of student orgs is somewhere over 1,400. Only about, I know it's less than 300 of those are sponsored organizations, which essentially means they're an extension of the department who sponsors them. Comes with a lot of benefits. It also comes with a lot of rules. We, Club Sports, make up 31 of those over 200 sponsored orgs. And the Office of General Counsel has said a number of times that sponsorship was created for our type of organization. So I think that's where our challenges often lie, in the sense of where they're sponsored orgs, and Marcus started to talk about this. They're expected to function under university and department policies and procedures. So that's purchasing, that's fiscal accountability, that's licensing, as Dennis talked about. You can only have particular suppliers create apparel for you with the Block M on it. So the use of the Block M is a benefit to a sponsored org. Where you get it is regulated. The opportunity to take tax deductible donations is a benefit that's afforded to student orgs, but it has to go into a particular account, and then you can only use it by going through the university purchasing system. So for every benefit, there's certainly a trade-off, and that's where the challenges come in. And I think when you're looking at the way that we operate, so we have 2 full-time staff who are dedicated to club sports in the advising sense. So that's me and our coordinator for club sports. We also have a financial specialist who's full-time dedicated to the financial side of club sports. But that still is for 31 teams. And so for every little thing that's added as a requirement to our teams, we're still the ones who are having to facilitate it, still with just 3 of us. So we're kind of in this weird sort of paradigm also of, we're not varsity sports, right? We've been told that in a number of ways and a number of times. But we're also not quite the same as a Greek organization on campus. With the level of oversight that we have, the Greek organizations are voluntary student orgs, so they don't have that connection back to the university that our clubs do. So we're in this tough spot of, we have the numbers, we're serving over 1,600 athletes a year. We have the numbers that Greek Life has, but we have the restrictions of an athletic department without the resources, without the personnel, and without the stuff that comes with that benefit of being a department with a lot of money, right? So, so we kind of get caught in the middle of what those expectations should be of us as a department, of our student leaders, of our student athletes. And so that's a constant challenge of, how do we fit into this, and what are those requirements that we set for our teams, but that also Student Life sets for us, that the university sets for us, and managing that with 3 full-time staff and some really phenomenal student leaders, but student leaders who this isn't their full-time job, and there's other priorities and things that are pulling their attention constantly.
Can you just, you want to describe any challenges?
Absolutely. I think sort of in conjunction with that, as you can imagine, there's a lot of red tape, a lot of things we have to go through. And it seems like, okay, we have to pay this team to go to this tournament. But in order to do that, we have to go through 5 hoops and 3 rings in order to get that money from point A to point B. And that's just one example. Jimmy King came up here and he talked about, all the time that varsity athletes have to go through. And all the struggles. And I think while we don't have necessarily the same amount of time in the facilities, if you are a student leader of one of these organizations, you are spending 20 plus hours a week between training, traveling, and setting everything up. You're contacting referees to come, officiate your games. You're contacting the other teams to get them to show up. You have to do every single thing associated with playing this game, and then ultimately go ahead and play the game. So it's sort of, a lot of it can get lost. And, as Coach talked about here is, some things, failures can happen off the field that impact directly the game because it's the same people doing it. I mean, after, we go and we had an awesome team this year. We won a Big Ten championship. We're celebrating. I'm like, all right, I got to go update our Twitter and Facebook and let everyone know. So it's like the same people doing the playing are doing every single other thing. And it's awesome. It's a great opportunity, but there are definitely challenges associated with it. And oftentimes when you wish, I wish I could just be a player and just play a sport. It's sort of the way things are, and not a bad thing, just the way it is.
Can you elaborate on the relationship, both past and present, with the athletic department?
Past. So we reported to the athletics, as Marcus mentioned, for 81 years. And then in 2009, we made the shift over to Student Life. I'll speak more recent past at this point, because I don't know a lot about what that transition was like. Neither of us were in the department at the time. You don't think we were even a coach at the time when we made that transition over. So when I look at us versus a lot of my peers in the field, we have a phenomenal relationship with our athletic department, and they do a lot to help us succeed. So we have a memo of understanding with the athletic department between recreational sports and athletics, and club sports is by far the largest beneficiary of that memo of understanding. We have the opportunity to practice and compete in most of the athletic facilities outside of the soccer stadium, the golf course, which we don't have a club golf team at this point anyway. Yeah, that's it. Those are the only facilities that we don't currently have access to. As they continue to build facilities, we will continue to benefit from that building as well. So in a majority of those facilities, we have second priority. So the varsity teams schedule their practices and competitions, and then we're next up. Where that doesn't come into play is the ice arena, Canum, the natatorium, and the tennis center. So those are the three that they have identified, the athletic department has identified as opportunities for community outreach. So the community outreach comes second to the varsity schedule, and then we fall right after that. So in all but tennis and ice hockey or the ice arena, our teams are not paying for practice time. They're able to go in and use that space for free. Clearly there are limitations to that because of the hours in the day and the time that we definitely want to try to keep our schedules within. So in the wintertime in Oosterbaan, which is part of the football facility, we're practicing from 9 p.m. to 1 a.m. and teams are in there and they're sharing the field. So not ideal, certainly. Could we use more hours? Absolutely. But if not for that, there would be no indoor practice facility for our teams. So I think there's certainly challenges and limitations, but at the same time, a lot of benefit. There are certain facilities that have a fee associated when you're talking special events or weekend events. But in the grand scheme of things, if you're looking at that cost versus going and renting a facility somewhere in the community, a high school facility, a municipal facility, the cost is similar, if not less. I have a great relationship with facility managers who I schedule with. I think that they have been as accommodating as possible to our requests. And work very hard to help us be successful and help us to get time that we need to be able to host competitions, or they're maximizing our number of practice hours whenever possible. So I think in the grand scheme of things, 75% of our teams participate in athletic facilities at some point in the year. And there are lots of schools, even in particular in the Big Ten, who have no access to their varsity facilities at any point. So I feel fortunate that we have that kind of relationship with the athletic department.
As someone who had mentioned earlier on, not funded, club sports aren't necessarily funded to the same level as other organizations or other sports on campus. Can you guys each dive into how that impacts your specific role in terms of funding that the club sports gets from the university?
So certainly talk about funding, I have to think a little bit more about how it certainly impacts our role. I'm not sure if this will be helpful, but so recreational sports here on campus is what we call a true auxiliary sport, and that we generate the monies that are then sort of cycled to the different programs that we have. We do happen to receive some money from the provost office, which comes through the Division of Student Life and then is allocated to recreational sports along with some other departments on this campus. Our second and probably primary for the department source of revenue is through our membership sales and through our revenue generating programs that we have. So intramural sports, which charges a fee for teams. Our challenge program on campus, which charges a fee, as well as our group exercise program. So all of the monies for that sort of come into a pot, if you will, for recreational sports to then figure out where the funds need to be spent. A lot of that obviously goes to salary and benefits of our employees, and then what we have left over, we determine which programs need what. Sometimes, as has been mentioned quite a few times, the fact that at many campuses that you go to, there is a student fee. And the money that comes from that student fee goes to libraries, goes to unions, goes to recreational sports. We don't have that here. And so that's the reason why we're sort of funded in the way that we are and structured in the way that we are. So it impacts, I think, some of the things that we're able to offer, I think both within the club sport program and also outside of that. So for my role, in addition to club sports, I also have intramural sports and our outdoor adventures and challenge program under me. So trying to figure out which programs need which resources and how to do that on a yearly basis and make sure that each of them are able to operate to their full potential, I think is the biggest impact. That probably comes sort of couched with a lot of things that are inside of it, but I would say that's the largest impact. And then I think trying to operate a program to sort of what we all consider to be Michigan standards. So trying to have something that this institution and the students who are here would be proud of. And that could be a challenge, obviously, with limited funding, but continuing to try to do that and to have students who are passionate about using what limited resources we do have to still offer what we hope to be a premier program.
So funding, I can speak to specifically from the coach lens. So I would say there's probably very few coaches in club sports that do it for the pay. So, you know, obviously recognizing that the funds that students, the fundraisers that students do, the fees that they contribute each year really pay for the coach or coaching staff that they have. And recognizing that, you know, we put a lot of time and effort into trying to make them successful and competitive teams that compete for national championships like was talked about. I think one thing that I didn't mention with the challenges that I was thinking about specifically that relates to fundraising is it really is based on who your officers are for your club. Those of you that have been in student organizations know that sometimes you have really awesome officers and things run really very smoothly. And other times you kind of struggle your way through and it's a bit of a challenge. So there's been years where we've had officers that have done a phenomenal job fundraising where they've been able to, you know, get us more resources or more facility time or even more equipment. And then there's been years where, you know, you're trying to run a training session with 25 guys and you have 10 soccer balls. So, you know, it really becomes a challenge, kind of the drain on those resources, and again, kind of trickles down to the field and kind of the impact you can have if you don't have the level of resources and sponsorships that you kind of need. So it really is student-led, and it really depends on how those students go about funding and gaining those resources.
So to give you some numbers and some data, I guess, we allocate $65,000 to our 31 club sport teams. Amongst our peers in the Big Ten, on average, we're about $1,000 per club behind everyone else. And that is including 2 universities who provide $0 to their club sports program. So, so taking that into account, we're probably even further behind when you're looking at the average of those who do provide funding. So, so right there, we're behind immediately in that sense. So that's a challenge, right? $65,000 divided by 31 teams. It's not divided equally. It's done through an allocation process where there's a committee of 7 students who are club sport officers who listen to 31 teams present their case on how much they need and why. And then they take that $65,000 and they allocate it, and they figure out kind of the future, or at least the immediate future of the teams who've come in and talked about why they need this money and how much. So it puts a big burden. We're only funding about 10% of operating costs. So in a given year, we're bringing in and spending closer to between $600,000 and $700,000. So we as a department are providing very little of that money that students are spending for their teams to function. So that's a challenge in itself, right? I would love to be able to provide more money to everybody, but we don't have it. So what we've done to kind of offset a little bit is to do more work with the development office. We have some great people in the development office who are dedicated to student life in particular and finding donors. We've worked with procurement to talk about how we can leverage some sponsorship money. Sponsorships are minimal though, and it's kind of a club by club who really goes out there and does the work to find the people who's the most appealing of the sports. Rugby tends to have more sponsorships. Cycling tends to have more sponsorships. Cycling is a really good example. It's just kind of the nature of the sport. If you see cyclists, they often have logos on the backs of their jerseys. So just in general, the culture of the sport is that sponsorships are something that companies seek from cycling teams. So they've been fairly successful getting sponsors to give $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 a year to put a logo on a jersey. So, but the development office has done some really great stuff to help us out, whether it's finding donors, identifying donors, just knowing that we need money and that we have a use for it. I've done a lot of work to help them understand what club sports is and how $100 or $1,000 can impact a team. And for a lot of teams, $1,000 is a huge impact. They work to kind of figure out how to connect with alumni. Rugby is a great example of a group whose alumni are very willing to give. Our rugby team this past year accumulated enough money to start an endowment. So now in perpetuity, they'll have money coming in at about a 4% return that they'll be able to use for operations. And right now, it's not a ton of money, but as you continue to grow that endowment, you're continuing to have that little bit of money that you can count on an annual basis forever. And that's a lot of credit to their alumni who've really rallied around needing to support this team that they were a part of when they were here on campus. But I think anytime you have people vying for a very small amount of money, there's a clear need to be able to provide as much as possible, but figure out what you value. So that's something we continue to work with the allocation board on. There's been discussions about from the students about wanting to potentially cap the amount of money that's provided to teams. When you're talking in that kind of scale and that kind of impact in a program, it's going to be something that will eventually be brought to a vote of our club sports council, which includes team and how that looks. But that's also one of those things that when we have a limited amount of full-time staff resources, it's a conversation that has to be had and decided on by the students, and our club council kind of fills that role.
Funding is a real fun one for us, especially like Lexi talked about. There's only so many dollars that can come around in terms of like how we are sponsored as an organization. I think we get somewhere around $1,000, which is awesome. Sounds like it when you're splitting it to go on 6 full travel weekends where you need hotels for 20 guys plus a room for the coaches, plus you got to rent vans to get to the tournament, plus you got to pay the entry fee for the tournament, to pay for the refs. It doesn't go all that far. So where we get our money from, number one, there's dues for us. It's about $400 per player, which when you think about all you're getting, all those nights in hotels and transportation, is pretty decent. We've done a good job of keeping those dues low and steady. But where's the rest of that money come? We got donations from alumni. That's something actually Andrew is also on the water polo team. He's our chair of alumni relations. So basically that's sort of his job, is accumulate a list and shaking people down in the best of ways. But we do restaurant nights. You'll see people post on Facebook, "Oh, come over to Mongolian barbecue and we get 15% this night," right? These are things that actually do support our teams. I mean, even going to Chrysler Arena after a gymnastics or a basketball game and cleaning up the stands, we get $300 as a team. It's these little things where we sort of chip away. And that's sort of, if you hear people complain about the parts of club sports, it's getting all the money and the resources to do all the fun parts that we love that are definitely the most difficult. So funding is, like I said, it starts with fun, and I don't know if that it ends with it, but it's something we got to deal with.
So after some of these struggles of funding and getting sufficient money to run these organizations successfully, can you guys talk about the most exciting parts of each of your roles?
It's pretty easy playing the games. Once you know, in water polo terminology, once I jump in the water, put my head against the lane line, sprint for the ball at the beginning of the game, like that's all I have to worry about, and that's freaking awesome because that's why, you know, we're all there. That's why we're playing the sport. The whistles, the sounds, the cheers. You got the cowbell in the back. You got to go blue. Jumping in the water after winning the Big Ten championship and seeing hail to the victors with your team and all your parents and fans in the crowd. That's what it's all about. Although it's not at the varsity level, being able to wear the Black M, represent this university, and know that, you know, when you're watching Michigan play Ohio State in football, it's like, yeah, I played Ohio State in water polo. Like, these are the memories that, you know, you sort of have and cherish. And I don't think the distinction between varsity and club, you know, once you're between those lines, really makes all that big a deal. You can be the biggest maniac out there and have sort of that outlet that sports gives you, and that's why we play. You know, I'm sure some of you at some point in all your lives play sports and understand those feels. So that's really what it's all about, is getting in there and loving to compete.
I just got to watch them play on Friday. I went down to their national tournament, and Dennis is definitely like the fastest guy in the pool. So, I'm gonna pass and come back.
So I'll definitely echo some of what Lexi said. I think the excitement that you heard on Dennis' voice when he was talking about what it meant to him, being able to work with students and watch them create so much from so little. The innovation, the leadership, thinking about what they go on to after this and how much this experience contributed to that is a big thing. And I think it helps, obviously, that I'm passionate about sports, and so seeing how other people make that sort of come to life for them are the biggest rewards. You know, I definitely think it's a fun job to have. It's one that it's hard to not get excited for or to stay excited for. It never gets boring. But I think that those are probably the highlights.
Yeah, for me, I would say that it's definitely a lot of it is I love the game. I love giving back to the game. I love coaching, but a lot of it is being able to work with student athletes on a daily basis. And I don't do that in my regular full-time job, but it's something I'm really super passionate about. And we kind of, our coaching staff on the club soccer team is really about like developing these guys as young men, as student leaders, as people that are going to go into communities and do great things. So a lot of the time we spend with them is on tactics and technical stuff and how to play the ball where, but a lot of it is also on life coaching, what they're doing next, deciding on a major, all those kinds of things. So it's just great to be there as another resource for these guys as they kind of navigate this really large institution. It's pretty academically rigorous.
Great answer. So I think for me, I've worked in a lot of different areas of recreational sports. I started in murals. I've done some membership stuff. I've supervised student staff of over 100 people, and really have found a lot of passion for club sports because of the relationships I get to build with students. On just the, I'm hiring you, I'm training you, I'm going to make sure you show up for work, I'm going to make sure you get paid, which is great. And there's definitely still some student development in that. But I prefer the opportunity to work with a smaller group of students more closely to help them succeed. And so I really see this a lot when they're coming to me and asking me to be a reference on a resume or asking me to write them a letter of recommendation. And I really appreciate the fact that I can speak to the successes that they've had and hope that the reason they're asking me is because we've built enough of a relationship that I've helped them to be successful and be that person that I'm able to write that letter of recommendation for or serve as a reference for. And it's super fun to have students come back and come back and see us and let us know what they're doing, or We've sent a few people out into the field, which, let me just put a shameless plug out there. For those of you who maybe don't know what you want to do for the rest of your lives, I can tell you that recreational sports is a really great thing to be a part of. From the perspective of you get to work on a college campus forever, you get to work with students, you get to help them succeed. And I mean, I get paid to do this. And so if it's something that you would consider, I'm happy to be a resource for that as well, because we need people in our field who want to help students succeed and who are in it because they want to be a part of that development and that our students can hopefully find.
So this one is mainly for Marcus, but also for Lexi and others as well. Can you go into some of the other aspects of recreational sports? Obviously, most of this has been on the club sports. This is a club sports panel, but can you use your experience to talk about some of the other aspects of intramural sports and the other parts of your role?
So I think, as I mentioned before, there's a few different components of my own role. One of those is intramural sports, which I'm going to sort of assume that folks have an idea for, but that's generally, again, just creating leagues in different sports for students to be able to participate against one another at the institution. I'm also over our outdoor adventures program, which has hiking trips, biking trips, different outdoor leisure activities, sometimes overnight, some just taking a trip up to the dunes and sort of collaborating with other folks and being able to be out in the environment with them. And then also our challenge program, which does a lot of intergroup work, sometimes with companies or with groups of students, with fun activities, but also activities that make you think, and activities that help to bond you closer to one another. In terms of other aspects of recreational sports, aside from the club sports and the ones that I just mentioned, facilities, so the folks who actually run the different recreational sport facilities that we have on campus, including our fields, Palmer Fields, Mitchell Fields, Elwell Fields, those kind of things. The administration that goes along with that, which includes rentals. So we advertise our fields and our spaces to outside groups that can then come in and use them for a fee. There's also marketing. So the way that we get the word out about the programs that we have on campus, we have a marketing coordinator here who runs a Facebook and Twitter account for the whole department, does a lot of work around our branding and what we look like. We also have aquatics, so if you're into swimming, that kind of thing, or are very knowledgeable around the pool, lifeguard training, that kind of thing, and group exercise, sorry, that's a big one. Group exercise, so anything from your cycling and spinning classes to yoga, Pilates, and those kind of things. So those are just some examples. And you can go at many different recreation departments and sometimes find other avenues that they sort of delved into. Those are typically some of the core ones.
The only thing I would add to that is we're one of the largest employers on campus. So for every one of those programs that Marcus mentioned, we have student employees at various levels, from the people who greet you and check your ID when you come into one of our facilities, all the way up to students who are working with club sports to make sure that travel is accommodated, or really working with intramural sports to make sure the leagues are put together properly. So we have everything from kind of just an entry-level job to something that's more supervisory and can be a little bit more of a leadership position on a resume. So that's something that we employ over 600 students. Yeah, 600 students in varying capacities.
So moving on into the realm of expansion, can you elaborate on what are some recently added sports? Which ones are really growing? What's coming next? Which ones do you really see are on the rise and going to be the next sports or the next really heavy amount of competition participation?
Yeah, so we haven't added a club sports since 2009. It started off at that point because of that shift over to student life. We went through an internal audit of the program for particularly risk management that really changed a lot in the program. So during the audit, we actually went from, I think, 45 clubs down to 33. And then since then, we've lost a couple more and have not added since. Part of the reason for that is resources, as we've talked about. We don't have really the funding to take care of our own teams, let alone add more facility space, and then full-time staff resources. We meet with our teams every other week, so that's a lot between Steven, who's our coordinator, and I. We split the teams in half, so that's a lot of hours in a week in meetings, plus the actual facilitation and getting things done. So I think that there are teams, certainly teams on campus, who have expressed interest. I think we had a list of about 20 different sports that have expressed interest. Some of those are very early. We want to get a group together, form an organization. We want to be on campus, which is kind of more the voluntary student org side of things. So some of those teams that were removed from the program during the audit were, I would say, primarily martial arts groups who were not competitive. They were more instructional or recreational in nature. And I would say most of the teams and organizations on campus start in that way. But we do have some highly competitive sports: lacrosse, Quidditch, ballroom dance, basketball. So there's currently student orgs on campus, voluntary student orgs. Some of them are renting space in recreational sports facilities, but paying to rent that space, and have constantly shown interest in being a part of our program and receiving the benefits that come along with it. I think that's probably the best answer I can give. Around the country, you would see a lot of different. Penn State has 72 club sports. They're not a competitive model, but there's 72 different sports. They don't have duplications of 2 soccer teams or 2 basketball teams. 72 different sports that are part of their program. So there's a lot out there. We're only at 31 of those. So I think that
we're still trying to get funding for flying brooms for Quidditch.
Correct. Yes, the Quidditch team has an exceptionally high expense in their flying brooms. Actually, if you've never seen Quidditch, it's a really very interesting sport. And I would encourage you to look it up on YouTube. It's the U.S. Quidditch, and they have an International Quidditch Cup, I think they call it. But yeah, it's really interesting if it's something you've never seen before.
What are some of those 72 sports that they have
A lot of those martial arts, Aikido, badminton, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, what else do they have? There we go. Highlight, racquetball, volleyball, dodgeball. Dodgeball's a new one. A lot of universities are going more towards you have to have a governing body in order to become an organization. So a lot of these sports have sort of sprouted up with governing bodies, Quidditch being one of those, dodgeball being one of those, basketball. A couple of schools in the country, probably 6 or 8, have tackle football. I had a tackle football team at University of Texas Arlington when I worked there. Competitive cheer, dance, ballroom dance. I think those are the main ones that I can think of off the top of my head. Really, anything you can think of. Curling is another one. So I said racquetball. Racquetball is really big kind of in the South. Arizona State has typically hosts the national tournament, and there's a lot of collegiate teams that are going there. And so all of these sports, well, in most situations, all of these sports have a collegiate division within their governing body as well. So that's one of the things that's a requirement for us is you have to affiliate with the governing body, you have to have a collegiate division within that governing body, and you have to be competitive with it, within that collegiate division.
So Lex, you just mentioned some of those national organizations, and can each of you talk about how you interact with the national organization or many organizations, in your case, Lexi, Marcus, that govern some of these sports?
So for water polo, our governing bodies, the CWPA, Collegiate Water Polo Association, we work with them actually quite a bit. We have a conference call every spring where all the leaders from each team in the conference, in this case the Big Ten, talk, and we set up our schedule. Okay, who can host what weekends? When do we want our tournaments to be? And so we're sitting down, with the commissioner and the heads of each team and making the schedule. There's legislation that's passed every so often. We're asked to vote on it. One of the things that came up this year, to give you an example, is for teams that are able to recruit and offer, preferential admissions, and in some cases, like under other academic funding, they will no longer be able to participate. We played in the national championship tournament this past weekend, and the team that won is from Missouri, and their team is mostly comprised of people from Madrid, Barcelona, Croatia, and Serbia. And so, raises some questions on, I don't know what's the draw to Missouri here, but there are, certainly different factors that are at play, and that's what sort of comes with the governing body. And we, as the leaders of student orgs, can actually draft up legislation, get co-sponsors from other universities, and then go ahead and pass these sort of things through. So it's definitely a working relationship, and they're a great resource to us, and they provide all the referees, all these resources that we sort of need. So it's a mutually beneficial relationship. They're pretty outstanding organization.
So just in general, governing bodies, kind of there's sort of a spectrum of them. From some of them are run by people like me. So I'm on the administrative board for the women's soccer league that is in this region. So some of the governing bodies are much more in-house, I guess, all the way up to, NRA has a collegiate division. So NRA is the governing body over our rifle team. A lot of them kind of fall in that USA, fill in the blank, USA Rugby, USA Ultimate, USA Triathlon. And in a lot of those situations, the governing body is offering some level of insurance to our student athletes, which is great. We've used it a few times in some catastrophic situations. But really, I would say that the affiliation is mostly just an opportunity for them to compete. So in order to compete, our baseball team has to affiliate with a governing body. They have essentially two choices. They go with one called Collegiate Club Sports, who has 6 or 7 different sports that they are the governing body for. They provide some benefits, particularly around organizing a national tournament. But that's a group that doesn't receive any type of insurance from their governing body. So our interaction with them is typically insurance related, confirmation related. So as teams go to national tournaments, we'll have to verify that they're enrolled students, that they're hitting a particular minimum GPA in some situations, and minimum number of credits being taken. They're standing within the program. So there's kind of a variety of things that we have to sign off on. And I would say that some of the other conversations that I've had with governing bodies has very recently especially been around inclusion of transgender athletes. There are certain sports that have statements that are statements of inclusion. There are some sports that have not gone to that addition of a statement yet. So those would typically be the conversations that I would be involved in, kind of from the bigger picture administrative perspective as a representative of the university, and support of those type of statements being included in rules. And so USA Rugby is probably one of the first. NERSA oversees our soccer and tennis. NERSA is it used to be the National Intramural Recreational Sports Association, so that's our professional association. They host a certain handful of national tournaments, and they have also been known to include a statement of how transgender students are included in participation. But really, the affiliation and my interaction with governing bodies is fairly minimal in a lot of situations.
I think so. Everything that Lexi said, the only thing that I'll add, specifically as it pertains to NERSA. So I serve on an Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion committee or commission for NERSA. So a lot of the statements and things that we sort of work through and figure out are then passed on to some of the governing bodies, specifically those within NERSA, so that we can share them and they can decide whether or not they're going to adopt them or give us feedback on them. So, but most of it, as Lexi said, is pretty minimal.
So looking forward a little bit into the future, what trends do you see coming to club sports and to your sport in particular? What changes will you make going forward?
Trends, I would say water polo's, I think one of those sports where you see every 4 years in the Olympics, people go, oh, that's pretty cool. Like I saw Tony Acevedo or something like that, or maybe the one name you might have heard if at all, in water polo. So it's generally cyclical growth, and that you'll see people join, oh, it's cool after the Olympics, and then it sort of tapers off and ramps back up. I think one interesting thing with this is with water polo is you see schools that have the success have pools of athletes that come from different parts of the country. In California, water polo is a pretty big deal. So you get a school like Michigan that draws some California kids and will have a decent contingent on our team, and you look across rosters, at national championship tournaments, and you'll see a whole bunch of guys from California. So I guess that's a trend for you there. I'll leave it at that.
From my perspective, I would say that the big question mark kind of nationally right now is, what does interaction look like? So as we talked about with the various types of interactions with governing bodies, I would say that universities are trying to figure out what their relationship is with their club sports. So we are on the very hands-on end with the accountability, with the expectations that we set for our teams and the way they represent our university, with the amount of interaction that they have to have with university policies and procedures. We're on the very, very hands-on end. If you talk to my counterparts at a lot of universities, I think they would love to be able to move in that direction because it's easier to set expectations. It's easier to make expectations clear, and it's easier to kind of help people succeed as long as you're able to be consistent with those expectations. There are a lot of schools that are somewhere in the middle and kind of just surviving in a lot of ways, but see a lot of room for improvement. Then you have schools on the low end who are going to say that their club sports are in no way affiliated with them in their department, in their university. So one of my other things that I do, kind of in addition to my job, is I work with an organization called Sport Risk Incorporated, and do a lot of work on the risk management side of things. So it's I teach a course, a 4-week online course that's particular to sport clubs, club sports, and risk management. I have worked with a lot of colleagues around the country to help kind of benchmark and help them to understand what some options would be when you're talking insurance, when you're talking what your perceived reality versus your real reality is. Because really perception is reality. So whether the school wants to believe that they are affiliated with that team or not, they're still wearing the name of the school. They're still giving money. They're still giving facilities. So to say, well, we're going to give you this money in these facilities, but you're not affiliated with us. In a lot of ways, they're kidding themselves. So I think that's a trend that professionals in the field are trying to say. We want to be able to provide this opportunity for students, but we need to be able to hold them accountable. And we need the university's backing to say, when a lawsuit comes around and the club and club president and the club coach and me as the assistant director and the director of our department, when we're all named in a lawsuit, who is going to protect us from whatever that lawsuit says? So when you're saying that the club is not affiliated with your university, you're saying that we're taking no responsibility, which in a court of law is not probably the reality of it. because you're allowing them to use your money and your resources and your name. So I think that's kind of an ongoing discussion that we have, and hopefully, I mean, I see a lot of value in the more hands-on way of doing things, because I've been in those situations, and those situations where I didn't have the ability to set expectations, or where the expectations were not able to be consistent across the board. It's much more difficult for me as the professional, as well as the students who are in those positions of trying to find success. So I'm hoping that we don't go away from this hands-on, active advisor model that club sports has in a lot of situations.
So I'll say from the soccer lens, I think, and clubs maybe, I think club sports are gaining some momentum in popularity. So I think there are a lot of students that play sports in high school that are kind of looking for that avenue to get involved or stay active once they get into college. So I think it's presenting itself in that way. I've seen in my 6 years a growth in kind of the competitive nature of it. So we've had teams in our division that, my first couple of years we would beat 6-7-0, it just wouldn't be a contest really. And now we're beating those teams 2-1, 2-0. They didn't have coaches when they first started. Now almost every team in our division has a coach. So really that competitive nature is really kind of growing. Teams want to be competitive. They want to win. They want to go to a national tournament. So all of that, I think, is kind of fostering a different environment than maybe we saw even 4 or 5 years ago, would be one of the trends I've noticed.
I think I'm quite a bit probably older than the other folks on this panel. So one of the trends that I think is changing, and you see this all throughout sports, is there really feels like, at least to me, that there's no longer this sort of season for things. Sports are taking on, this kind of goes along with what Steve was talking about, this year-round aspect, as people are getting more and more involved in things, even at the youth level, where you see basketball and soccer and those kind of things that are going longer and longer and having more opportunities for people to participate. So I think that's one of them. And then I think growth on an international level. So a lot more, and there's clubs that are already operate there, but a lot of times they're at a sort of a different level. I think that more universities and small colleges even are starting club sport programs, where in the past it really felt like club sports, minus this competitive model, was really just another opportunity for students to get together and to compete in sports that they liked. And now you're seeing schools using that sometimes as an alternative, maybe even for an athletic program. So if they don't have the money to have a full athletic program in this particular sport, maybe we'll have a club for this and be able to fund them in this way, and also provide an opportunity for students. So I think those are some of the areas where there's some trends and some changes happening in the field.
So we want to use this last 15 minutes to open up to you, the audience, any questions you may have. So feel free to raise your hand and any questions you have for any members of the panel. Could you speak up for a second? The question was, has there been a push to have a club football season at Michigan?
No, we've never had an interest expressed in it.
I think it'd be interesting if there were. Obviously, that would raise a lot of questions that we already have in some of our clubs around liability and that kind of thing. But that one, interestingly enough, hasn't come up. So I think all 100,000 people are already at the game. So
a couple years back, Cross made the transition from club to varsity. What do you think about that? And then in addition, I know the men's side, some club players were pulled up to the varsity team. What do you think about losing players in that respect to varsity squads?
Yeah, so there's both lacrosse teams, both men's and women's, were created, I think, within a year of each other on the NCAA side. So in the situation of the men's team, what they did was basically pick up our club team, including the coach, and make them all NCAA athletes, scholarship them, made the coach a full-time employee. I will tell you that they brought millions of dollars with them, which is how they got to that point, is because they had money to bring. But basically what that left was a hole in the club sport program. Since that time, we haven't added a men's club team, although there is a student organization on campus that is a competitive men's lacrosse team. At one point, there was a governing body rule also that you couldn't have a varsity team and a club team on the same campus and affiliate with that governing body. I think what's happened in that situation is that a new governing body was created, and that a lot of people have shifted to that governing body instead. I wasn't here for that, but I know that for that group, it was a huge success. That's ultimately what they had in mind when they started, and when they started investing money in a full-time coach. Even on the club level, they were investing a lot of money into a coach who was going to make them successful and put them in a position to win national championships. So for them, that was their goal realized. When they did that with the women's team, they did not pick up our team and move them over. They started from scratch. New coach, went out and recruited, a whole new team. There maybe were a few players who tried out and made the varsity team, but by and large, left the club intact. And I think that's more common. It definitely creates less of a disruption for the club sports program. I don't know, this is 100% my kind of anecdotal observation, but I don't know that club sport athletes who have been playing in a club sport often understand the requirements of now becoming a varsity athlete and the differences between the two. Just from the perspective of your time not being your time anymore, having someone you kind of started in this world where you've picked and chosen how you spend your time and how you manage your time, and now that's not your reality anymore. So I think it's a hard transition. I don't know that athletics would do that again, take a club and just move them up. But I think that in that situation, it worked. John Paul is still the varsity coach at this point, 5 years later. So I think that they were successful in that transition. There have been clubs who have continued to push the athletic department to create a varsity sport. Women's water polo was the other one that somewhat recently, I mean within the last 10 years, 15 years, 2000. So they were another group that we had a club on campus. We were part of the athletic department at that point, so it was a little bit easier to kind of shift players and coaches and things like that. The push mostly by club alumni to start various teams, in particular men's rowing, women's ice hockey. Those are the two that I can think of off the top of my head that have really kind of pushed. Fencing a little bit. They've kind of been met at this point with the athletic department saying that they're not currently interested in adding varsity sports. That's kind of the position that they've taken, at least in the most recent past.
Do you see a huge difference in the way that like women's and men's sports are run like on the club level?
My short answer is no. I don't see a lot of difference. What I think I've seen a lot of is women's teams struggle a little more to find girls who want to be that competitive. I think you see that trend also in intramural sports. Girls are participating in sports at a high school level, and then they're coming to college or to a university, and they're not as interested in that competitive participation even in that same sport as they used to be. So there are definitely certain sports that don't follow that trend. I would say soccer is one of those. That the women's team does not have any issues finding girls to come and try out, and they're constantly having to cut people on an annual basis. But especially those sports that maybe you don't have experience with prior to coming here, they struggle a little bit to recruit. So women's rugby is a good example. They struggle sometimes to convince women that rugby is a great sport to play. I think when they get people to come and participate and try out and get to know the sport, they get people who then really love the sport and stay connected once they graduate, similar to the men's team. But as far as the administrative side of things, I don't see a lot of difference. I think the women's teams are motivated by the same things. They all want to be nationally competitive. In a general sense, the women's teams tend to be better organized. Whether that's just the officers that have been in those roles or if it's the way that they train from one set of officers to another. I would say kind of in a general sense, the women's teams tend to be more successful with kind of picking up where the last group left off and continuing that success. But in general, I would say that they're run similarly. They have similar priorities. They fundraise in a similar way, and they look for fundraising opportunities in a similar way.
I would say some of that, again, to go off of what Lexi was talking about, some of that has to do with exposure, just in my opinion. I think traditionally, some of these sports haven't always been sort of advertised or broadcast in the same way, so opportunities for women to participate. And I believe, and I shouldn't speculate this way, but I believe that if there was an athletics person here in the room, they'd say the same for intercollegiate athletic sports, that historically, these programs haven't always had the amount of support, the amount of exposure that puts themselves out there so that students can even know that they exist. A lot of times students are excited once they find out, oh, this is actually something I can do, and then they can decide on what level of competitiveness they want to achieve while within that. So I'll probably add that.
Any more questions? All right, that's going to wrap up our panel. Thank you very much to all our participants. That's going to be it for class today. So, there we go.
If you guys have any feedback on this went, I welcome that. Please forward it on to me.